Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Glad to be back. Hope everyone had a nice Thanksgiving. I wasn't suspended for the last few weeks, as some may have assumed. Barbara and I have found out over the last few years that that's a disservice to the guests who are authors to compete with the election results. And, we just didn't do a show on election day. Then the following week we had kind of like a last-minute cancellation because of the guests' Wi-Fi in Ireland. While we try to reschedule John Hughes, you may want to check out his latest publication, The Healing Practices of the Knights Templar and Hospitaller. It's a fascinating travelogue of his visits to Morocco, Marrakesh, the island of Rhodes, and Krakow. I don't know how much the listeners like the Templar shows, and this one is, John's book is about how the Templars deposited the medical knowledge they learned from their stays in the Holy Land during the Crusades, and they stayed at the places I just mentioned, and left a legacy of their knowledge. It's really a fascinating autobiography is one way to describe the book. Really neat stuff. I highly recommend it. You can contact our friends at Inner Traditions about it, and I hope get some cell towers built in Central Ireland so we can get John as a guest, and he has another book coming out soon too. So just keep an eye out for John Hughes's books on Amazon. Okay, so anyhow, Wallace Wagner is our return guest tonight. We plan on doing a 2-hour show unless the Gulf Coast storms don't knock Barbara off the air. He was a guest with us a little over a year ago to discuss his Crossing the Crevasse. He recently published his follow-up book, Within Grasp. It's more about UFOs in the Bible and the changes in perception after an experience. And our guests also love those shows. You can learn more about Wallace by visiting his website, withingrasp.net. And I think it would make a great stocking stuffer. Hey, Wally, how you doing?
Hello, Mark. How are you this evening?
Oh, I'm fine.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah. Glad to have you return to Nightlight Part 2, and you'll be, I guess, with Barbara, I think, later this month, or next month, I think.
I think it's the 28th of December.
At the end of next month, okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And, that'll be another interesting show. I think both of us interview so differently that both shows will not be the same. So, for all the people who have subscribed, since you appeared with us last year, they may not have gotten to hear that show. So let's review your sighting and what gave you the what do you call it? You say you call it my Epiphany, and I use that for the title of tonight's show. So let's get into that a little bit about who you were prior to your sighting, and over the course of the next hour and 50-some minutes, we'll learn about your changes.
Sure thing. Well, for the audience, I grew up as a very conservative Methodist and Southern Baptist. And I do mean conservative. I mean to the point that the earth is 6,000 years old. You believe everything in the Bible as it's written. UFOs, if they exist, they're definitely from the devil. And, being an author was not even in the cards for me. But in 2016, I was a mailman. And in September of 2016, I had just made a delivery here in Bedford County, Virginia, to a lady who lives on Hayden's Bridge Road. And something told me to look up in the sky. I don't know whether it was something or somebody or some connection or it was just a coincidence, but I stopped in the lady's front yard and looked up. And right over my head was what I called a white tic-tac. It appeared as a solid white, glistening white object with no nacelles, no wings, no windows, nothing. It looked literally like the white tic-tac meant. And I saw it for about 3 seconds. And then it was there no longer. And, I'm guessing it was about 1,500 feet over my head, something like that. Might have been 2,000. I'm not real sure. I'm guessing, again, it's maybe 50 feet by 30 feet for the size, and no sound whatsoever. The sky was vivid blue, crystal clear day. And I kept asking myself, what happened to it? I mean, it disappeared, but did it take off so fast I couldn't see it? Or did it cloak? Or did it, go into another dimension? And I'm pretty well satisfied that it cloaked. And I just couldn't see it anymore. Of course, I had all the questions. Did I really see it? Was it the Goodyear blimp? Was it a weather balloon? All that stuff. And this being 2016, I really didn't discuss it a whole lot. I told my wife and a few family members in my Sunday school class I was teaching Sunday school at the time, conservative Sunday school, I must say, and they took it pretty well. I'd just say they have some open minds in that class, and it was a good experience. But there again, I really didn't even mention it again until it came out about a year and a half later. It's one of the videos that perhaps your audience has seen on TV that showed the Nimitz carrier group and the fighters. And they're the ones that actually called it a tic-tac. So the video's out there. That's the exact same thing I saw. So I was vindicated. So now it's not, taboo to talk about it. As time went on, all the questions started developing in my mind. Are these crafts, other life forms? I had an open mind. But are they mentioned in the Bible and all this and that? And it caused me to go back through the Bible and re-examine the entire Bible through a different lens. And Mark, when I did that, I realized that these crafts are actually mentioned from Genesis all the way through Revelation. The Bible's full of them. And in one place, in 2 Kings, they even are cloaked where somebody couldn't see them. So it's one of those things that you realize, or that I realize, that maybe all this stuff that we've been taught maybe just isn't quite true. So as time has gone on, I got to meet Reverend Michael Carter, and a real gem of a person, I must say, the real deal. Mm-hmm. And we discussed what I saw and my book that I ended up writing, and he told me I was on this path. And as it turns out, I realized I am on a path. I have left all the previous teachings and what I had perceived as reality behind me, and have moved forward outside all of this, and have found many new truths and realities for me. And Crossing the Crevasse, my first book, was basically a recap of what I had found up to that point. It was written about 2 years ago, and actually my viewpoint has changed somewhat within that 2 years as I continue on this path. Within Grasp came out about a month ago, and it's much more spiritual in nature. And in it, you will see where some of my beliefs have actually changed since I wrote Crossing the Crevasse. So that's pretty much where we're at now. I'm much more spiritual in nature. I no longer am religious. I'm much more spiritual, and a lot less religious. I don't subscribe to any particular denomination anymore. For me, the Bible is basically another book, because I have studied so much of the background of the early church fathers, the background of the early church, and the Bible itself. I now realize that it is definitely not the word and last word of who we perceive as God. So I'm beyond that. So I'll just go ahead and throw that out.
Okay. Now, so since we're officially into the holiday season, let's look at one of the examples of your change from a conservative, having a conservative Christian outlook, to discussing the Star of Bethlehem stopping above the manger?
In the past, I would have believed, and probably did believe, that the star was a star, even though it moved in a fashion that stars do not move. But there again, you're taught that God was moving it. I no longer subscribe to that line of thought. To me, anything that was a light up in the sky was a star for the Hebrews. And stars do not move in that fashion. For me, and from what I have gleaned, is the star was none other than a craft, without doubt. And that craft, of course, looked like a star, I guess, from a distance. But the giveaway is that it shot radiant light beams down and hovered above Jesus. And then, you have the shepherds out in the field of Ruth. It hovered above them and shot the light down that shone around them in a circle, much like what happened with Paul on the Damascus Road. And then this voice comes out of this craft. A voice does not come out of a star. The voice always comes out of a craft, telling the shepherds what to do, and don't be afraid and whatnot. So, I have certainly gone from it being a star that God moved to now knowing that it was a craft with intelligent beings that are much more advanced than we are, inside of it.
It just defies laws of physics.
Sure. I mean, there's lots of other places, too, that these stars move in erratic fashions. One, of course, is with Deborah and Barak in the book of Judges. I think it's chapter 5. If you have a Bible in your audience, it may be called the Song of Deborah and Barak, but if you go down to about verse 20, you'll see where it says the stars fought from heaven. From their paths, they fought against Sisera. The stars don't fight, and they don't move from their paths. And then in verse 23, a little further down, it says, Curse Meroz, said the angel of the Lord, utterly cursed its inhabitants, because they did not come to help the Lord. Well, in the past, Meroz was a location for me. Now, I pretty much fall in line with the Zohar, the Talmud, and several rabbis in believing that Meroz was actually a planet when it's talking of its inhabitants. Most expositors today would tell you that it's a location. It has to be a physical location, but nobody can agree where that location is or was. It makes much more sense to me now to know that it is a planet and that it is mentioned in the Zohar, and there are other rabbis out there that agree that it's a planet or a star. So, that's another place where my opinion has changed, and it's changed a lot. I mean, all throughout the Bible. So that's just a little example.
In your books, you cover the example from Barak, the fighting stars. You get in ancient India, you get the Vimanas. You also touch on the Battle of Nuremberg in 1561 in, obviously, Germany.
Yeah, that happened late enough to where it's fairly well documented.
Yeah, so there you have three examples of aerial battles before the Wright brothers invented the airplane. So how do you explain that?
Well, I explain it by crafts. Crafts that have been coming to this world since perhaps its beginning. Crafts that have come to every culture on every continent. And the beings in these crafts were perceived as gods. I mean, whether, Shiva or Vishnu or whomever, I mean, wherever you're at, these crafts came. And they didn't come to destroy. That's a key point. They came to, well, for lack of a better word, give us light, enlighten us, teach us. And this happened around the world in every culture. And it happened here. It's happened here. It's happened in Mexico. It's happened in Peru. It's happened everywhere. It just wasn't, the Fertile Crescent area. It was around the world. And these beings or entities have special powers. They're much more advanced than we are. So they were perceived as gods. And that's my firm belief now.
Okay. And speaking of they were seen as gods, you do mention the classic 80s movie, The Gods Must Be Crazy. That's a nice lead into that section.
Back then, Mark, if I could travel back in time and take a book of matches with me, even back, let's say 1500, and I was able to create fire in my hand, I would be deemed as a god. I mean, look what happened at Paul. He was bitten by a venomous viper, and he was perceived as a god because he didn't die. And within Grasp, I actually mentioned a program that perhaps some of our listeners have watched on TV in the past, the Black Sheep Squadron. Mm-hmm. That happened in an area where it's something very much like the day the gods were crazy in that movie. We were dropping supplies down in those jungles, and the natives, they were very, very secluded. They did not know what was happening, but they knew the plane was dropping chocolate bars and goodies down, and they found some of the crates. And what happens is the plane becomes venerated, and the plane it becomes a god, and a cult is started venerating what they call John Frum, and you go back and here's they have made a plane out of sticks, and that's still going on today. In fact, there's still a cult there today on some of those islands. So things we don't understand, if it goes too far out, your mind just can't comprehend it, so you just deem it as a god. That's human nature. And these beings that came in antiquity had immense powers, and they were deemed as gods. But that's not God for me anymore. As recently as 2 or 3 years ago, my God was still the God of the Bible, but it's not, he's not anymore. For me, the God of the Bible was a local God, and perhaps we can, get into that some. But okay. My God exists as spirit only, and is full of truth and full of light. And for people that, would disagree with me, I would say that's exactly how God is described in the New Testament, as light, love, and spirit.
Okay, but the Old Testament is pretty much just, even though you get passages like the four corners of the earth. It doesn't necessarily mean it's all encompassing of all people. It's pretty much just a localized collection of stories and events. But you do talk about your version, or how you have come to view God since your Tic Tac sighting, and get into that in around page 50 of Within Grasp. So, what is some of the evidence that you have thought about that makes you think that the Old Testament God is really just a localized deity?
Well, I've done a lot of reading, maybe more than what's good for me, but
I'm familiar with that.
And then again, looking at the Bible through a different lens, things come out to you that never came out before. And when you really start studying instead of reading, and there is a difference between the two, you will see things and understand things that were glossed over or not even mentioned in Sunday school class or in church and whatnot, and definitely not in most books. Well, one of the things I had to find out on this path was God really God? And I know that's a loaded question, but for me, I just had to know. It seemed like the God of the Old Testament was 180 degrees different than the God of the New Testament. And then I realized that Jesus never called Yahweh or Jehovah his Father. Never, ever. He only mentioned Father or Abba. And then I realized that Jehovah was only mentioned in the King James. You have all these new later translations, some of which are supposed to be better and more exact. Jehovah is not mentioned at all. So going from there, I started, doing a lot of studying, and there's several lines of thought, but I put the two main ones in my book. Both are not extremely flattering. Let's make that clear. But this is my journey and my epiphany. I don't want to impose my beliefs on anyone else. But what I have found out and what resonates with me, Mark, is that Yahweh was definitely a local God, a local Canaanite God. He may have been a god of copper that was venerated by the Kenites. Copper smelting was big back then. Mm-hmm. And there's a line of thought by, some scholars that he was their god. He may have also been the god of weather and war of the Midianites, and possibly the Shasu. Now, the Shasu were basically just simple cattle nomads in the Edom area, not to be confused with the Shemshu Hor of Egypt, two completely, different peoples. But the Shasu are actually mentioned in Egypt on some documents that Yahweh was their God. And, I found that pretty interesting. So those are the two main avenues that this Yahweh was a local God of Canaan. And Going a few steps further, I have come to realize that he had brothers and sisters, and I'm going to have to rattle for about 10 minutes, Mark, to explain all of this.
Yeah, well, getting to God's brothers and sisters is important to show your transformation.
Well, the word Elohim, plural, with the I-M on the end, it used to be in the Bible over 2,500 times. Today, as we sit here talking, it's in the Bible 0 times, all taken out. It was Elohim who created the earth and all that's in it, plural. So another place where, my belief has changed, let me insert this right now, is several places you will read us or we. We go down or
made in our image.
Thing. And of course, if you're in Sunday school class, well, immediately that becomes, that's the Trinity. That's God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. That's what us is. Well, for me, not any longer. Us is a plethora of gods, Elohim. And Elohim is I guess what you would say all the gods that came to this planet. Elohim, or El, there's a little bit of confusion there, but El is probably the chief Canaanite god and was the chief Canaanite god. It was not Yahweh. It was El, E-L. Now, some would say that that's really Elohim or short for Elohim, and it may be, but nonetheless, it was not Yahweh. Yahweh was just a local Canaanite god. El apparently had 70 children, and each of them were given a tract of land on this planet. And Yahweh got the tract as what's generally Israel today, somewhere east of the Nile, going up through Gaza and what we call Israel, Israel today, almost over to the river Euphrates. But that's what he was given. And this El is interesting. You're not taught about El in Sunday school, or I haven't been in any Sunday school I've been in. You're taught about Jehovah or Yahweh, but it was El that Jacob built an altar to. It was not Yahweh, and he called the altar Bethel, meaning the house of God. And if you look around the Levant area, all kinds of cities and towns end or start with El, E-L. That's how prevalent this Canaanite god was, this major Canaanite god, the god of Canaan. His name was El. And again, there may be a secondary line of thought, Elohim, but in any case, my point is it was not Yahweh. And interesting thing is Yahweh had a brother, and apparently his name was Baal. Now, I know that's going to throw some people off, but consider Job and consider what happened in the Garden of Eden. In Job, this Satan, or who some people want to call the devil, I'll get into that in a minute, but he and this God are talking pretty much casually and pretty much on a dare. Yahweh puts Job, in the middle of I guess an experiment to see whether or not he would remain faithful, and he did. But it cost Job dearly. including his first 10 newborns, or 10 children. He ended up getting replaced with double his cattle and belongings and 10 new children. But I find it exceedingly unfair that he lost his 10 original children and did not get those replaced. But nonetheless, this Baal and Yahweh were brothers. And there's a very good line of thought that says Baal ended up over time being morphed into Beelzebub, which ended up over time being morphed into Satan, or interpreted as Satan. So I guess I'm here telling you that there's a large part of me that now can accept that Yahweh and Baal were actually brothers. And if you read between the lines, this Baal or Satan actually accuses Yahweh of building a fence around Job, just like Yahweh built a fence around the Garden of Eden. It had a parameter. And there were other people living outside the Garden of Eden. This is sometimes overlooked, but there was another population on the earth at the time this Adam and Eve were supposedly created. And that's another show for another time, but I often wonder now, were they created or were they tweaked from perhaps existing humans or something else? But, who did Cain marry? Someone outside the Garden of Eden. And this Satan shows up again in the Garden of Eden and, causes Eve to fall. And there's a part of me now that realizes, well, wait a minute now. Yahweh was given land and everyone else was given land. So the Garden of Eden must have been built somewhere on the land that Yahweh was given. And perhaps these other people lived on land that another god or a perceived god was given. And that all makes sense to me now. The world was full of people at that time. It had to have happened that way. So getting back to the God and Satan again, this El or Yahweh, there's conflicting information on it, had a wife. Yahweh always had a consort, but El possibly had a wife as well, and her name was Ashua. Ashua was venerated greatly by the Hebrews. This is beyond doubt. So many artifacts and artifices have been found supporting her in and around even the temple. This started around the time of Solomon's son. She was venerated in and at the temple, and she was often depicted by a tree or a branch or perhaps a pole. Maybe you've heard of an Asherah pole. But so we have male and female gods, and that's what Elohim is. It's not only male, but it's male and female.
And you, Wally, you just say that, give us a couple references that she is referenced as Queen of Heaven.
Well, she's mentioned as Queen of Heaven in Jeremiah, for one thing. But you have to understand, in the King James, she was removed altogether. Only recently in some of these new translations, like the New International Version, the NIV, that many people subscribe to as being the most exact, she's now mentioned 40 times. And in the New King James, she's mentioned 6 times. So,
okay. Big difference.
Jehovah's been removed, and Asherah has now been resurrected. So we know for a fact that these gods were male and female. And this Yahweh had a consort or a wife, and El had a consort or a wife. There's 2 lines of thought there, but she played into both of those. And the Asherah sometimes is considered to be a tree, and you might see an inscription if you found an old document as an Asherah tree or an Asherah pole. But without doubt, for me, that helped understand that these gods were plural, and they were both male and female. And of course, we're getting female, preachers today in some of the denominations.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah,
go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, you did interview a lady minister in your book. We'll talk about her shortly.
Okay.
But and speaking of all these gods, you do mention this Psalm 82, and it's a really short, one of the shorter Psalms. And when Gary Wayne has been a guest with us, he's called that the counterfeit council. It's a really it's like one of those things that really sticks out like a sore thumb. A lot of people, I didn't realize it until Gary mentioned it, but it seems at least two guests have written about it. It is very odd. It does sound like it's referencing multiple. Here we are back to the multiple gods again.
Well, there's definitely multiple gods. That's come out throughout the Old Testament. There's multiple gods.
Yeah. So, what do you think of this Psalm 82?
Well, I did put it in there because it sticks out like a sore thumb, just like some other verses do now. And I get my information from people that are a lot smarter than I am. They have their PhDs and whatnot. But I see this as being Yahweh talking to his father El, wanting more power, more control. And he's asking for this power and this control. And it shows that he's jealous. He's a jealous God. And we kind of sort of often overlook that, but it needs to be looked at realistically. He was a jealous God. I say was because he's not here now, John 14. But this jealousy, for me, plays right in the covenantness and everything else. It just goes to show you that this God was not omni anything. Let me digress here and go back to Exodus just a minute. In Exodus 4, there's another one of these bizarre stories that's in the Bible that is, again, often overlooked and not mentioned because it does not fit the typical agenda. I'm going to set the stage for you. Moses, who had just led the people out of Egypt, Zipporah, his wife, and their son are traveling, and they get tired, so they spend the night at an inn. And I'm reading into this. It's Exodus chapter 4. And this God, Yahweh, lands his craft. That's not in there like that, but because he gets out and starts walking. I know that a craft is involved. He's walking around the area where they're spending the night looking for Moses. He doesn't know where he is. He's having to look for him, and he's walking around looking for him. Why? Because he wants to murder him face to face. I can envision him knocking on a door at a motel room, and Zipporah answers the door and sees God face to face, one of about 77 people or so that actually saw God and lived, by the way.
Yeah, you bring that up in Crossing the Crevasse. That's another sample of your close reading makes you go back to look at the Bible. It's like, oh, yeah, there it is.
Right. Well, anyway, he knocks on the door, and Moses answers, and Yahweh's standing there. I'm here to kill Moses. Is he here? And due to Zipporah's quick thinking, she cuts off the foreskin of their son's penis and places it at Moses' feet, and Yahweh changes his mind and does not kill Moses. So this story has a lot to it. It's one of the places where this God changes his mind. He did not know where Moses was. He had to walk to get to him. And then he's going to do what, it's in the Ten Commandments not to do, murder him. None of this could have been done from the air or just bingo and it's done because he's God. It had to be walking on the earth, trying to find Moses, and then wanting to kill Moses, and then changing his mind not to kill Moses. I mean, it's really bizarre. It's one of those things that if you're doing a study on the book of Exodus, it just may not be there. Just like Psalm 82. One of the last studies I did before I left the Methodist Church was a complete study of Psalms. Now, of course, every Psalm was not mentioned, but of course, 82 was left out completely. It did not fit the agenda. So, it's one of those things that you have to look for, and then when you find it, it's an aha moment. It's a place where this Yahweh is wanting respect and is asking for it. And he's doing it amongst his brothers and sisters. So that's something to keep in mind. What I said that Yahweh had brothers and sisters is, not to be taken lightly.
I like you really delve into the Old and New Testament stories. You're a very close reader. You provide a lot of contrast. Like what you said, where whatever book, Deuteronomy, where it says you can't kill people, and he's God showing up to kill Moses in that story.
Yeah, the one he just brought the people out of Egypt that he supposedly did all the miracles for, which by the way, miracle is nothing but science that we don't understand. I don't believe in miracles the way I used to either, Mark. A miracle is like somebody striking a match back in 1500. It's science we don't understand. That's all it is.
But you do talk like with the discrepancy that you just gave. You give other ones about there were supposed to be 7 animals on the ark, and like the next chapter, it gets whittled down to 2 for no apparent reason.
That's because multiple people wrote the book of Genesis.
Yeah.
And most scholars, even in Israel today, would tell you that Moses did not write Genesis or the Torah. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, the old school and the agenda says that he did, but there's too many contradictions in Genesis, or else Moses was smoking some wacky weed. But in one place, it's like there's this dichotomy. It works in lineage too. I mean, in one place, 2 by 2 they went on the ark. In another place, it's 2 and 7. Mm-hmm. So which is it? But it can't be both.
Yeah, and you draw our attention to those facts.
It's just like I say, the Bible's not quite what it's made out to be, and if you like being led, like being taught, then it's easy to believe what you're being taught and where you're being led. But if you want to do it on your own, you will find things that cause you to realize that you're being fed an agenda that's been in place since the early church. And I don't hold, teachers and ministers and people of faith in ill regard. I mean, that's what they've been taught, and that's what they do. But the truth is out there, and it's for me, it is no longer totally. I use the word totally in the Bible. There are certainly truths in the Bible, without doubt. Mm-hmm. But a lot of it is for me conflicting information, and it has been modified so many times by man that it's basically the work of man. There's no way I can believe that is the work of my God. It may be, the work of a God for some of the listeners, but for me, it is not the work of my God, and that is without doubt. It's basically a history lesson with a Jewish and Greek flair to it. And Jerome had to work, with both sides. It's almost like 2 books being, bound into one book. I don't think they should be together. I think you should have the Old Testament in the book by itself and the New Testament in the book by itself. I mean, for me, it's that different. Anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent there.
It's what Nightlight's all about, was, looking at history and, what people were thinking and believing at the time.
Look at all the one-offs. I mean, this is a book many consider to be their foundation or their foundational belief. Mm-hmm. I mean, you have Melchizedek. We know nothing of him. We know nothing of Jesus for most of his life. We know very little about Joseph, Jesus' father. We know a lot more about Joseph in the Old Testament, in Genesis than we do of Joseph, Jesus' father. We, all these people, so many of them, Hiram Abiff, the list just goes on and on. They're thrown out there, and we know nothing about them to add to the story. I have a problem with that. I have a problem with the missing years of Jesus, mm-hmm. and so many other things.
Yeah, he disappeared longer than we know him.
Sure.
What was going on there? So But you,
and I have a problem, going to basically any church today, and let me expound on that real fast.
okay.
I mean, you read the Apostles' Creed. I mean, the big Methodist church here in town does that every Sunday, and I just cringe because they read the one that says Jesus, the only Son of God, and I know that not to be true from the Bible itself. I mean, from Genesis 6 to Job 1 to Galatians 3 to Hebrews 2 to Romans 8. I mean, we're all sons of God, the big God, not the God of Israel. Yahweh always kept saying he was the God of Israel. But I'm talking about the big God of the universe, who I now subscribe to, the God of light, love, and spirit. We're all his children. And that is mentioned in the Bible. And Jesus is a brother to me. I look at him as a brother and a master teacher who is much more advanced and evolved than I am. And I subscribe to Jesus' teaching. I am still a disciple of Jesus. Let's get that out there now. He's everything to me. I want to be like him. I believe his teachings were true and trustworthy. But for me, he came here to teach us. And that was his main purpose. For me, we all go to heaven when we die. And you look at Dismas on the cross beside him. I get the impression the guy was a lowlife, a thief that did nothing to benefit society. And he was not born again. He was not what we called saved. None of this. And just a few words and he's in paradise with Christ. This tells me that, and from so much other information I've read, including the Book of Enoch, that we all go to the third heaven when we die. And I'm so convinced that the early church needed power to thrive and to grow. And what has been changed is to really say that Jesus was the only God. You have to be born again, meaning to accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior. You have to be saved. You have to pronounce it publicly. You have to be baptized. You have to do all these things, and then you'll make it to heaven, depending on which denomination you believe in. If you're Methodist, it's not once saved, always saved, and that's something else. Everybody has their own interpretation. Everybody claims to have the truth, but that truth comes in over 33,000 Protestant denominations. Each one's a little different than the other. But my point is that I am thoroughly convinced now, Mark, that none of us die. And we all go to the third heaven, which is what Paul mentioned in 2 Corinthians. And that's really one of the reasons I put the Book of Enoch in the appendix and within grasp. It's one of those books that a lot of people wanted in, Origen and Clement of Alexandria and some others, but the original Jews did not want it in there because it made continual references to the Messiah. So it got axed from the Bible, but it's still in the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible to this day, and it's still available to read in many flavors. There's more than one book, by the way. Enoch wrote many books, but the one I put in there is the one that's publicly available online for people that want a free copy, it's in the back of this book. It specifically describes the third heaven, which is mentioned in 2 Corinthians. And I've been to many studies on Revelation and what happens at death and on heaven. And it's been mentioned to me more than once that the third heaven is basically above the stratosphere, above where the birds fly. I mean, that's the best some of these people can come up with when they're trying to teach you what the third heaven is. You really have to read the book of Enoch to know what the third heaven is. And of course, I'm sure the people in the know back then were aware of what Enoch had written. We all go to the third heaven. And I'll let that ride for right now. Let that sink in.
Okay. Well, I'm sure a lot of people think that tonight's show is, a lot of heresy. If Nightlight were around during the Spanish Inquisition, we would already be in the Iron Maiden. But you with all the challenges to the traditional interpretations of the Old and New Testament, or Testaments, you still maintain a very active faith.
Yes, I do.
You do write about you're a disciple of Jesus, but you're also embracing of Hinduism, every other denomination, religion. So how do you see yourself with what seems to be kind of like a contradictory outlook, but
well, that's a good question, and I'll answer it this way. We're still here. In the past, we've had all these gods that flew in here on crafts. Now, I mean, Hermes flew, Solomon flew, the Elohim flew, Quetzalcoatl flew, Ra, Vishnu, the Anunnaki, they all flew. We're still here. They did not come to destroy. They came to teach. You look at the teachings of Buddha and Jesus, and they're very close. You look at a lot of the other teachings from Zoroaster to Vishnu to what am I wanting to say? Mohammed, early Mohammed. It's very, very close to what Jesus taught. So I have done some studies on these other religions, and I find truth in them all. I find truth in Christianity. I find truth in these other religions. Live your life with meaning. Treat your neighbor as yourself. Realize that love is what permeates the universe, and we are creatures of love and light. And learn things that aren't physical. And that's really, I believe, where we have fallen short. Some of the Far Eastern religions are better at using their brain in ways that we don't think of here or don't do here. What I mean by that is, let me use Paul as an example. Paul of the Bible. He was a tent maker. That was his line of work. And then, of course, and he was a persecutor of Christians. And then he had the Damascus Road experience, where this light, of course, shone around him, and he gets the voice from the sky again, coming from a craft. And he becomes an apostle. What's often overlooked is this did not happen immediately. This happened years after the disciples were picked and were in place. But Paul did not become an apostle immediately after that experience. He went to Saudi Arabia for 3 years of training, then came back to be an apostle. Now, we don't know who trained him or exactly where he was trained. But being that it's Saudi Arabia, the first thing in my mind is, well, that's where Mount Sinai really is. And that's the home of Elijah and Elisha. I just found that interesting. Some oppositors think today that maybe he was trained by none other than Jesus himself. What we know is that he had powers after that 3 years of training. He did not have those powers before. An example, he blinded a fellow by the name of Elymas. Just looked at him, and he went blind, saying he was going to go blind, and that's what happened. I mean, how did Paul get that power? Just from 3 years of training? And you think of Jesus as being a teacher. Everyone called him rabbi. Mary Magdalene to Nicodemus, to all the disciples, to the Sanhedrin, everybody called him rabbi. He was known as a teacher. I try to encompass what he taught, and the only thing I can see that falls in line with Paul would maybe be Peter. Did Peter really get what Jesus was trying to teach us? Today we focus on our heart, and I think Jesus was focusing on both our heart and our brain, that we have powers in our brain that are untapped and unused. But Peter actually was able to step out of the boat and take the first step on water by himself. It wasn't until he panicked and called for Jesus' help did he get rescued. But he had, A, the courage to do it, and B, he actually did it himself. And that comes from being with Jesus for about 2.5 years. Now, there's not a lot of this in the Bible. You have that little story of Paul and the story of Peter, what I just mentioned. But where's everything else? Everything else that anybody else ever did to compare it to those two acts has been removed. It's all about Jesus. Jesus was the one who turned water into wine and whatnot. And now I wonder, did he really turn the water into wine, or did he change people's perception that he turned the water into the wine? That's something that I'm debating right now, because he had these powers of the brain. It's one of these things that you wonder what was taken out. You know, Gnosticism was a big thorn in the side for the early church. A lot of Gnostics.
Right.
And I put the Book of Thomas in within grasp. You know, you read the Book of Thomas compared to Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, it's a completely different flavor altogether. It appears that Thomas really got some of what Jesus was trying to teach. We have these powers within us. Look at the second half of John 14. We use the first half typically at a funeral. It says God is away now. If Jesus goes to the Father, that's why he needs to leave. He was here on a visit. That's mentioned in the Assumption of Moses, which is in Crossing the Crevasse. But if he goes to the Father, we will be able to do miracles, not only like Jesus did, but even more miracles and works greater than what Jesus did. So we have the power, but it is untapped. We are not trained to use it. And that's one of the truths that's been exposed to me as I continue to go down this path that I'm on. The church is all about the heart. It's all about the heart. But nothing is taught about the brain. Where do you go for brain training? You don't. You go back to seeing that you have 4 bars on your cell phone and what's on TV or what's the Sunday night football game. I mean, that's where we're at. So I think that we have really fallen short. Some of it done by purpose with taking a lot of the Gnostics' writings out. I think they were much more in tune with what Jesus was trying to teach than what we give them credit for. And, of course, all the Gnostic stuff was taken out. So you've got to go searching to find it now.
Okay, and there are some interesting passages in the Book of Thomas.
Some are really out there, Mark.
Yeah, I was just looking at, there is light within people of light, and they shine it upon the whole world. And that's in, I don't know how you pronounce that, Logion 24, and then, Logion 30, there is, where there are 3 gods, they are gods. I thought, it should be talking about a monotheistic God. So that's
surprise,
one,
surprise.
Yeah, another one of those passages that makes you scratch your head about what's really going on there.
Well, we are creatures of light. We belong to the light. If anyone in the audience has ever read the Pistis Sophia, there's a description of Jesus actually turning into light, and this is much more than what happened at the Transfiguration. They're very similar, but this is a much more detailed description with the disciples sitting on the Mount of Olives watching Jesus literally turn into a bright, dazzling light. And that's who we are. We are children of the light. And as evolved or experienced, or dare I say, have gone through as many incarnations to improve and to elevate our soul as he has. Jesus is someone to emulate. We all need to emulate him. His words are truth, and he is a creature of the light and a creature of love. And in his pure form, not half human and half God, but in his pure form, he's totally spirit. I'm convinced of that. Anyway.
Okay. So
that's what I have to say on that.
Well, Wally, you enlisted some of your friends to provide their commentaries. They are, you have 3 theologians The military guy is, regular friend of yours. What were you trying to achieve by bringing in other perspectives for this book?
Mark, I love your question. That's a profound question, and a very good question. I wanted to kind of have a starting place, an ending place, and a place to where I think we're at. And I think that I covered all those bases. The first interview I did was with Dr. Barry Downing, who, if your audience or if our audience does not know this, he was the first preacher or man of the cloth who actually admitted that there were UFOs in the Bible and actually wrote a couple of books on it. And his first book was back in the 1960s. I interviewed him, and of course, he believes that a lot of the stuff that happened in Exodus was from a UFO, and I totally agree. I brought in Reverend Michael Carter, who I know that you know.
Yep.
He's an active preacher who has a congregation now, and he has had a miraculous healing as well as visitations. Mm-hmm. And I find him 100% legitimate and 100% believable. And he's one of those people I've gotten to know fairly well, that when he walks into a room, Mark, the room is 4 shades brighter than what it was prior to his entering.
I've seen that, yeah.
He brings light into the room, literally.
He does.
And I've known other people that suck light out of the room, but we won't go there. But he is the real deal, and I wanted to share with the readers about his healing and some of the beings that he has encountered. I put Dr. Paul Smith in there, who was an original member of Project Stargate, which some people may know was a secretive program mostly run by the CIA. It had many sponsors. It's been disbanded now, but those in the know that remote viewing is real. It's legitimate, and it's still being used, perhaps secretively by the militaries around the world today. Paul now teaches remote viewing, and I give his references in the book. He's out in Utah now. His claim to fame was he actually saw what happened with the USS Stark days in advance. He saw it verbatim. He wrote it down as part of a remote viewing session. It didn't make any sense to anybody at the time, so it got put in the file cabinet until after the event. They pulled it out, and what he had seen days in advance was exactly what had happened. That's just an inkling of what remote viewing does. It allows you to basically yourself or your spirit or your entity to leave your body and to go out anywhere into space, going through mass or objects, to see things and to perceive things, and allow the visions of these things to come into your being, and you report what you see and write that down with an interpreter. And that's kind of sort of in a nutshell how that works. I am not a remote viewer, so I'm not an expert, but I wanted to put that in there to show as an example of what we can do with our brains. And this is just one small little aspect. but it's pretty amazing that you can go forward. It's a little fuzzy the further you go out. It makes no difference in time how far you go out. I mean, if you went from here to Mars, there's no time lag, that kind of thing. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there that I think the reader would find, interesting to read. Then I interviewed Barbara, Reverend Barbara DeLong. Of course, this is, I guess, technically her show. So.
Oh yeah, it is.
Okay, it's her show.
Yes, hopefully, I'm just like the sidekick. Hopefully she'll.
I didn't know how to bring you in on that, Mark. Your sidekick.
Yes.
But I tell you, a remarkable lady. I am honored to know her. She is very well versed, covers a lot of different bases, and I found her to be a gem. I use that word again, a gem. We got into all kinds of interesting things that I put in the book, including her work with the Stones in the New England area, which is one of those things that gets overlooked or purposely not mentioned.
Well, you two had a nice discussion about her documentary, The Secrets of the Stones, and your trip to Egypt, where you did spend, was it 3 days?
At the Great Pyramid.
Yeah, investigating the pyramid. So,
I've been inside. I made it inside with a square. They confiscated my camera. But let me tell you, and I will tell you, it's another one of these perceived realities that we have, that Khufu built this pyramid, and he was a pharaoh of Egypt. And, you go there, you're taught that he built it. It was made about 2560 or so BC, plus or minus so many years, depends on who you believe. And the Egyptians had all this experience building it, and this was their crowning achievement. And that each of the pharaohs wanted to one-up the other. And so, they started with, the brick pyramids, and then you went to the pyramids, then you went to the bent pyramid, and then their crowning achievement was the Great Pyramid. Well, I beg to differ. I am totally convinced the Great Pyramid is far older than 2560 BC. I believe it could be at least 10, 12, maybe as much as 30,000 years old. I believe it was there, and the other pyramids were mere attempts to copy, and the best they could do was the bent pyramid. I do not believe it was the tomb of Khufu. If you look at the other pyramids, which were tombs, you found venerations, artifacts, hieroglyphs, all supporting the pharaoh. None of that was found in the Great Pyramid supporting Khufu. In fact, the only statue of Khufu that's been found was hundreds of miles away, and I put a picture of what was found in crossing the crevasse. It's a picture of, or a statue of Khufu. It's about 6 inches tall. You can hold him in your hand. That's the only thing that's been found in the Great Pyramid. There's no hieroglyphs. There's no statues. There's no artifacts there to help the pharaoh, cross over. Nothing, except some red granite. Red granite signifies Hebrew in historical terms. And then you look at what the Great Pyramid is and where it's located, and you come to realize that this is nothing but a description of the earth put together in stone. It sits at the geographical center of the earth, the center of the earth. How did they know that? I mean, and then you get into the lengths and the widths and the heights. It all has meaning. It all connects to the earth in ways that there's no way they could have known. Absolutely no way they could have known. Interesting thing, in the book of Adam and Eve, another book that's left out of the Bible, by the way, the writers tell Noah to take the embalmed body of Adam and place it in the center of the earth. Now, if you believe literally, then you believe that somehow Noah went to the center of the earth, down to the core of the earth. But this is a place where most people don't believe literally. The center of the earth was actually the Great Pyramid. So that's where Noah took the embalmed body of Adam and placed it, was in the Great Pyramid.
Okay, I've never heard that one. That's fascinating.
That's in one of the old texts that's not in the Bible, but I found it. You know, why would somebody make that up? I mean, it's not a joke. Somebody got that from somewhere, and the center of the earth is the Great Pyramid. It is the geographical center of the earth. Now, I know that you and I are both from West Virginia. You still live there, but as you may know, Braxton County is the geographical center of West Virginia. And West Virginia is shaped almost like a teapot, so it's hardly round or hardly square. But if you could imagine going to Braxton County and finding the pinpoint center and balancing West Virginia on a pinhead, it would be somewhere in Braxton County. I mean, and that's exactly what the Great Pyramid is with all the land masses. It's the geographical center of the earth right there. And it's different from the other pyramids. And then I'll let you move on to another topic, Mark. But it's actually, it's built into the ground. It's got sockets. And none of the other pyramids have sockets. It is, foundationally part of the ground, and people a lot smarter than me have said that there's four sides showing, and in the 1970s, due to satellites, we found out that the sides aren't actually straight; they're concave, and they're concave to the degree of the exact curvature of the Earth. Now, how would the Egyptians have known that in 2560? The exact curvature of the earth is built into the Great Pyramid on each of the sides. And it's been calculated that there's 36,000 pure limestone blocks on each side. That's what covered the Great Pyramid. It appeared as a solid object. Interesting thing, on those 36,000 limestone cap blocks, a name was written that nobody could decipher. Individual names on each of those blocks. And for the biblical fans out there, in the book of Revelation, 36,000 times 4, because there's four sides, is 144,000, which matches the number of the chosen ones. And each of those blocks had individual names written in a language that no one could decipher. Now, you wonder what happened to all those. Well, there were some earthquakes. To make a long story short, those were easy pickings for mosque in Cairo, and that's where most of the blocks have ended up to this day and have been reused, remolded and reused. So all that's lost to antiquity now.
Well, in Michael's A New World, if you can take it, or Alien Scriptures, you can find where he a quick reference to where the world was known to be a sphere, and you were just talking also about God's ability to fly earlier in the show. So it's with the navigation that was required to get around in spacecrafts, you can see how the alien gods were able to figure out the circumference of the Earth, and
you would have had to have been up in the air.
Yeah, and incorporate the archaeoastronomy into the Great Pyramid.
Exactly. I mean, if you really wanted to stretch out, there are possibly several references in the Bible that pertain to the Great Pyramid, such as "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth?"
Oh, okay.
That's one of them. Well, I don't want to get off on that tangent, but there are, it depends on how you read your Bible, the hermeneutics, how you want to interpret things. But if you feel that God built the Great Pyramid, which there's been books out there that, actually say that, then it's been there a long, long time. And another point I want to make real fast, and I'll get back to your other question we were discussing, is that where the Egyptians' philosophy and theory falls flat for me is they use the one-up theory of how each of the pharaohs wanted to do one better than the previous one. You look at the next one right after Cheops or Khufu, and it's Yusuf, and I put a picture of what's left of his pyramid in crossing the crevasse. It's basically a pile of stones. And that happened at a generally peaceful time in Egypt. And so going from one pharaoh to the next, you had the crowning achievement of the Great Pyramid with all its miraculous wonders that's still standing today, to a pile of rocks. And I just wanted to point that out. Where all that technology went that they supposedly had went by the wayside in a heartbeat at a time when the Egyptian society was pretty much, stagnant with no wars or anything like that. It was pretty much a peaceful time. So that falls flat on its face. And back to the last person I put in my book. I don't want to forget this. I wanted to interview several people that I did not know. I live in Virginia now, which is part of what's been called the Bible Belt for decades. And that was kind of sort of hard to do. You just don't walk up to somebody and say, "Hey, can I interview for my book?" with the kind of questions I wanted to ask. But I found a fella I bought some insurance through, and he had made a mention of going to church. And I asked if I could interview him for my book, and he allowed me to do so. And as it turns out, it went pretty much like I thought it would. He was a conservative Christian, and the questions I asked and the answers he gave, I put in there just to kind of sort of give insight as to where we stand today on a lot of these topics. There's no way the book could have been scientific. I decided not to interview the other 4 or 5 and just put one in, and it went pretty much like I thought it would go. So that's in there. Just to let people know pretty much where we stand today and where I used to stand, by the way. So everybody's my brother, and he's everybody's my sister, everybody's my brother. I'm not degrading anybody. I've been there, so I know what it's like. I know the feelings. I know the emotions. I know what the perceived reality is. It's just I've gone outside the gates where everybody's taught, and everybody wants to be taught, and I have taught myself. And I guess the catalyst for that was me seeing the white tic-tac over my head. So this has been going on for 6 years now.
Okay. And since I do feel obligated to continue with the homage to Barbara, since this is her network. You two do have a interesting exchange about ghosts, and you also have an interest in near-death experiences. Is there some kind of overlap there, or do you want to say the near-death experience for?
Well, I can talk a little bit about it. Typically, near-death experiences are treated as a subject, within itself. You might find a book just on near-death experiences. There's many out there. For me, it ties in with reincarnation, which I now totally believe in. Let me talk about that just real fast. The early church actually accepted reincarnation for about 200 years or so. Origen, one of the founding church fathers, who was even called the brightest mind the church ever had his own doctrine on reincarnation, with people coming and going and, in souls incarnating and then going back, coming back, then going back. And this was accepted. By the time it got to Jerome around 400 AD, all that had been taken out. We can't have multiple lives. We can only have one life, and we got to get it right. And we got to get it right through Jesus Christ. And Jesus Christ can only be found through the church. It's all about power, greed, and money, and that all played out as the centuries went by. It's really what caused the Protestant Reformation. A lot of that's in crossing the crevasse as well. Reincarnation was accepted, and there's still a remnant of it in the Bible. Even some preachers I've had were not aware that John the Baptist was Elijah, verbatim. Jesus says that. Now, you have to have, ears to hear, and if you have the ears, you need to hear, but if you can accept it, John the Baptist was Elijah. So Elijah ended up getting beheaded. So Elijah technically died. Technically. And if you believe what's in Malachi, that he may come back again yet as one of the two prophets in the book of Revelation. So he really didn't die. Of course he doesn't die. None of us die. We pass. We pass from a physical reality to a spiritual reality. And that's really what a lot of these near-death experiences allude to. I've done quite a bit of study on near-death experiences. It all ties in with reincarnation, without a doubt. Dr. Newton wrote a really good book called Journey of Souls. Michael Newton. It's his life work. He did 29 cases of, past life regressions and whatnot. And every one of them support reincarnation. Every one of them was alive before. Every one of them had very similar stories on what happens when you die, and it falls right in with near-death experiences. When you die, your entity, your soul, your being exits the body, and in some cases this can happen, moments before you die, because the spirit and soul knows that you're going to die. Lots of times you exit through your head, and you either, if you're having a near-death experiences, you're often floating above your body, but you realize you're outside your body. You still have sight. You still have your mind. You're still who you are and were. It's just you're in a spiritual form and not in a physical vessel. If you have the near-death experiences, you end up back in your body, and it's often life-changing, much like what happened with me with the Tic Tac. That if you're talking about past lives, these people that have these, they typically, not always, but typically, end up in some type of a tunnel, and they feel that they're moving, and eventually they see a small light that seems to get bigger, and they inherently want to go towards that light. And I asked Barbara some questions on this light, and I'll let her answers stand for themselves in the book. Let's just say we're all creatures of the light. We know that we want to be where the light is. And we seem to end up in a place where we sometimes know people, know family members, and we realize that we're not alone, that we're in a place of tranquility, a place of agape love. We call that agape here in the South, but the correct pronunciation is actually agape, love that we cannot fathom. We notice we're in a place of understanding, of forgiveness, and what all the attributes of God. And in every one of these 29 cases that Newton describes, there's a guide. So apparently we all have a guide. And what this guide does is go over what happened in the life that we just experienced. And while you're in this spiritual state, time does not exist. So your spirit lives on. That's something else to consider. Not to go off on a tangent, but when you're also in these crafts, moving at high rates of speed, your time is significantly slower than what transpires here on Earth. I put an example of that within grasp, but that if you were in a craft going X amount of the speed of light, so many parsecs out into space, and decide you want to turn around and come back to Earth, no one would know you. It would only be a few seconds in the craft, and it'd be hundreds of years here on Earth. And that plays into how some of these gods perhaps live so long. There's also accounts for that happening in some of the cultures, in some of their histories, people leaving.
Like Methuselah.
The solar boats of Egypt. There's records of that in India as well, of people going up in a craft and coming back, and it being much later. Much later. Yeah. But that's just proving a point that we don't die.
It is a fascinating topic when was it the kings prior to the flood lived to unheard of ages. 900 years old, and people having kids in their 90s, and things like that. The timekeeping was different at that time. I I think it's just a fascinating subject, and
it is very fascinating. You wonder if timekeeping was different, or you wonder if you wonder if the foods they ate were more pure. You wonder if there was less radiation. You wonder about all kinds of things, including what was the time measurement itself even different. But
well, if they could figure out how to engineer the Great Pyramid, I'm sure that they could figure out, okay, like the year is this long, so it's pretty. It would probably be pretty much like it is today. So
I'm guessing it pretty much was like it is today, based on the little bit of time differential that we have from Joshua. He's actually caused time to stop for a little bit, but extend the day. But
their calendars would have been pretty much like ours. So how do you explain Methuselah living to be over 900 years old?
Well, I can't. That's the honest answer. But we could theorize.
Your time travel idea is an explanation.
That
unless
is
they
an explanation,
really did.
And we do know that to be fact, by the way. That is fact and not conjecture. That the faster you travel out in space, the slower time is for the person inside the craft that is traveling. That's been proven.
Cool. I don't know.
You wonder if they were so close to God, and there again, some of the ancient texts that are not in the Bible say that the descendants of Adam were all segregated from the heathens of the earth. That the descendants of Adam, going down from Adam up through Noah, the 10 generations were all segregated and lived on a mountain. And that's why they were so, I guess, not privileged, but so in tune with the Lord. All the heathens were in the valleys, and that's where Cain had to go when he murdered Abel, off to live with the heathen. So he married what they call a heathen, or someone that was not part of the special lineage of Adam. So you wonder if these people that lived so long during that time, with Yahweh actually walking there in the garden, were they intertwined with him in ways that are not written down? I don't know.
All right. I think there are some, the ancient authors did present information that is captivating. We just don't understand it.
True. Very true.
I think there's some neat stuff in there. We have maybe about 10 minutes left, so as kind of a wrap up, and then you can plug your website. But do you think that your experience was very similar to the other major authors who have documented their visitations or abductions? There's Michael's numerous visitations. Whitley Strieber's Communion is one of the leading books on the subject. Betty and Barney Hill's case. What do you feel that this is where you are today is a normal response?
Well, it was life-changing for everybody you just mentioned. But keep in mind, I barely had a close encounter of the first kind. Technically, you're pushing it to even call it a close encounter of the first kind. And they had actual visitations. I have not had a visitation, at least that I know of, nor have I been abducted. And I hate to use that word. Let's say taken on a ride on a craft, at least that I know of. Just having the sight of it above me at a time that I was so involved in church and Sunday school, and it still changed me. So we've all had life-changing experiences. You know, being an author was not in the cards for me at all for retirement. And here I've spent time writing 2 books and just explaining, what's happened since then for me. And these other people have written books as well and shared their stories. And, in the past, I've always thought I had an open mind, but now I totally believe these stories. I totally believe them. So whether it's, Barney and Betty Hill or Whitley Strieber, they had their experiences. And I know firsthand that Michael, it's just firsthand.
Mm-hmm.
So there's realities out there, science out there that we just don't understand. And it doesn't mean it's from the devil. It just means we just don't understand it. It plays into the hand that what Michael has said, and that I've also come to realize that we're all connected some way, somehow. We're all brothers and sisters of that light, that love, that spirit. All have their own paths to travel. We're all in different stages of traveling in the path. I use the analogy of a pond and lily pads. I was on the previous lily pad where my Christian brothers and sisters are, and I've jumped to another lily pad. So, I encompass the lily pad I was on, but I also encompass the lily pad I'm on now, and I realize that there's other lily pads that I can jump to when I'm ready. We're all on a path, and we're each on our own path, and we're each, whether we acknowledge it or not, have this spirit and soul inside us who yearns for advancement, yearns for knowledge, for wisdom, that loves to be nurtured and loves to be acknowledged. And that's one of the things that has really changed in me, Mark, is that I now realize this, that my soul is yearning for knowledge and for wisdom, and realizes that the whole universe, and universe is plural, is connected by love, a love that we cannot understand because the amount is so great. And that's kind of where I'm at now.
Also, a nice way to lead into the Christmas season and some other UFO shows we have coming up next week, and another biblical show a couple weeks after, in like mid-December.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But this is like a little theme. And it wasn't really planned. It's just in the more, read of their books and talk with the upcoming guests. there is an interconnectedness to a lot of the spirituality and UFO sightings and phenomenon.
These UFOs, they don't even call them UFOs. I had a professor friend here at Liberty University, probably one of the most conservative Christian universities in existence, that basically told me, well, not basically, verbatim told me, we don't call those UFOs anymore. We call them crafts. I was taken back by that. But I will forever remember that. But these crafts, these visitations go back to antiquity. They just didn't start in 1947. They go back to, prior to Christ. And there's documentations of them, but they just don't come into play. We're not alone. We've never been alone. And you have to accept the fact that everyone is God's children, and the fact that we are kind of sorted far down on the totem pole when it comes to intellectual abilities and spiritual abilities and whatnot, even to the point where if we don't understand something, it's a miracle, or if you see something you don't understand, it's from the devil, that kind of thing. We have a long, long way to go. But there's hope for us, if they haven't given up on us yet.
Okay. Wally, we might as well wrap with that positive message. You want to give out your website real fast, and then we should be just about out of time.
Sure. It's easy. It's the name of the book, Mark. It's withingrasp.net. It gives a synopsis of what's in the book, and a little background on me, and hopefully it would entice someone to want to read it. Just keep in mind, it's my journey. It's no one else's journey. It's my journey on my path. What I have found since leaving the confines of mainstream Christianity, and there's a certain sense of freedom and a certain sense of accomplishment, a certain sense of love that I have experienced that I did not experience before, and I do want to throw that out.
Okay. Well, let's stop there, and I just want to thank you for being a great guest, and you'll be back next month with Barbara, and we made it through the storm, and we'll see everyone next week.
Very good. I've enjoyed this immensely. Thank you.